I want to thank Representative Jaspers for conducting the last meeting. That's what happens when you got legislation going on at the same time you got a committee meeting call. So maybe it won't happen again, but if we do, we'll get through it. Today we're hearing House Bill 290. We're going to take testimony. We're going to hear from the author, then we'll take testimony from those that are for or against the bill, and then at that time we will entertain a motion after all the testimony has been heard. Representative Dempsey, we're ready for you.
Thank you, Chairman Benton and members of the committee. I appreciate y'all giving us an opportunity to put this before you. House Bill 290, which I think you have in front of you, the Family Care Act. This measure, this exact bill, passed out of Industrial Relations in 2012. It did not make it out of rules. It got caught in that process. So we want to bring it back to you again and see if we can take it farther down the road, especially in the House. This will allow employees working for any business with 10 or more employees to use their accrued sick or medical leave for a sick immediate family member, defined as a child, spouse, or parent. It's a realistic, cost-effective measure and policy promoting transparency and truth and trust between employer and employee. There just a minute. This came to me several years ago when a group of people in my district, a group of people from Rome, brought their concerns to me. The director of a women's shelter, members of a service organization for people with disabilities, and local members of the American Association of University Women. My constituents told me about people that they serve who are struggling to provide for the health of their children and for disabled or elderly, particularly family members, without the flexibility to use their own sick leave days to provide care. State law requires parents to immunize their children in order to attend school, but really doesn't require any time off to allow them to do that. There's several things that I want to tell you about just briefly about this. First of all, if you'll look at your bill, you'll see the very beginning are some very, very brief definitions. Defines employee. It defines that this is about businesses that employ 10 or more individuals. It defines immediate family member as only the employee's child, spouse, or parent. And it defines sick leave. Nothing, absolutely nothing in this code requires an employer or a business to implement sick leave. It is not a mandate to tell them that they must offer sick leave, but if they do, to allow that employee to be open and honest if it is their child or another person that is sick and needs them just as much. If you'll look at line 21, you'll see that. It's if they have it. The employer that provides sick leave shall allow an employee to use sick leave. So it's if they actually do have it. If you will look at line 24, it states clearly that that leave must have been earned. That employee must be meeting the policies that that employer has set in place. On line 28, that refers to properly, that this must be carried out in a very proper way. That's actually on line 30. The word properly is in that line. And then at the very end, line 31 and 32 states that the Commissioner of Labor will actually be the person to implement any discretions with this. The bill is a win-win any way that you look at it. There are many who are involved that want to speak to it. We have a few that are here today, but before I leave you, I want to just tell you from my heart what I think this really means. It strengthens families. You know, many families are living paycheck to paycheck right now. I know many of us right here are doing that same thing. It's hard to be here. But you know what? We have the privilege. And a state employee, if you're working in a school system, that is there. You can use your sick leave for another family member. It is this small sort of catch-all of businesses that have 10 employees, up to 50 that don't fall under the Federal Family Leave Act. We're not putting any restrictions on anyone who has that tiniest of family businesses. If you're under 10 employees, we know how hard you're working to try to make it happen. It also strengthens the economy. In this economy, businesses are looking and should be continuing to look for ways to save money, and family care days are actually one way to do that. Studies show that businesses benefit from flexible workplaces with measures just like this. It increases productivity, and loyalty and morale is much higher. They decrease turnover and absences for illness. The third thing that I want to leave you with is that it promotes healthy classrooms and saves money. You know, children who go to school sick get other children sick, and then that comes home, and there it goes. You're in a little bit of a mess there. Also, working families who do not have this time are often the ones who are most likely forced to take a child to an emergency room on the weekend or at night when they're off of work at strange hours when a physician might not be there. And that is not a good measure of our expenditures. It's not cost effective at all. It increases taxpayer responsibility to have to fund those doctors in emergency rooms. Sick kids recover faster when they are cared for by a parent, and studies show that the presence of a parent can actually shorten the hospital stay for a child. So this is just what I would call a good sense, modest measure to help businesses and help families in Georgia. We have several people, I think, that have signed up to speak. Mr. Chairman, if you'd
We'll see if,
be willing for that.
anybody on the committee has a question for you.
Sure.
Do I have anyone on the committee that has a question for the author of the bill? Number 9.
I'm glad to see this. You know, I've been working on this bill for 10 years.
I know
so,
you have.
Have you talked to the chamber and gotten, because that was the only reason this bill hadn't passed prior to now. We actually passed it out of the House once, and then the chamber killed it. So.
Well, it passed last year, even after their comments. It did pass out of the House. It did not, it was very late in the session, I think in one of the final days, so it did not navigate its way through rules. But we did get that far last year, so we want to begin the discussion on it as early as we can and get it going today. And I appreciate your efforts over the years.
Number 15.
It's me, it's Rick, Representative Jaspers, Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess got a couple of questions on just reading this, you know. In our communities, most businesses, you know, from 10 to 50 that we're talking about, how many of them offer this sort of thing now on a voluntary basis?
You know, many do. You're right. They're about, I think it's about 878, maybe 880,000 people that are employed right now in Georgia that fall in this window right here. You know, it's not going to mandate it. It's not going to make that business have a sick leave policy if they do not have it. But if they do, it's time for us to encourage this type of transparency between employer and employee.
Yes, ma'am. If I may, do you think will it chill small businesses in that 10 to 15 group to just move sick leave to annual leave, just to back out of having to look at this? Just my curiosity, thinking about a small business owner.
You know, that would be heartbreaking, wouldn't it? I mean, there are always ways around things. We learn that. That's one reason why we're all here and elected to do our very best. I think this is where we can address it, so that's where it's been chosen to approach it.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? I have one. I was wondering if you have any statistics in states where they've already done this, where employers have opted out of sick leave or they have changed their hiring policy where they don't hire people with small children.
You know what? I'm not aware of that. There are about 8 other states that I know of. that are participating that already have this legislation in place. I'm not aware of that. I am aware, though, of the fact that in so many places, when this kind of conversation is available, employees tend to take fewer days off, actually. There's a responsibility factor there. If you are going to tell someone that you're sick, you're probably not going to go in for the whole day. But if that employer is going to allow you to leave for a few hours to take a child or a parent or a spouse to the doctor or to address a smaller concern than that, you're probably going to go back to work that same day. So, you know, there are ways to sort of maximize, I would say, the time spent away off of the job. Whereas if you're going to call in and say I'm sick, you're probably not going to show up.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. We have several people that have signed up to speak. We have 6 people. I think we're going to time it at about 4 minutes. I think that's plenty of time for everybody to have their say. And the first one will be Barry Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We really appreciate, those of us at ARP, this opportunity to come out and support House Bill 290, the Family Care Act. I stand before you today as a father, a grandfather, and a husband whose wife, a former school principal, is now down in Henry County at a hospital with her mother right now. We never know when we are going to have a spouse, a family member, a father, a mother that is in need of care. We don't think at ARP, our 1 million members here in Georgia, that good employees ought to have to be choosing between their family and their job. That's more stress, more pressure at a time when the family and the individual is in crisis. In my role as administrator of the Governor's Office of Consumer Affairs for 26 years, serving 4 Georgia governors, I always found it to be the case that when we could make the sick leave work for our employees, they worked harder for us. I would say to the Chamber of Commerce, this is really a win-win. The bottom line will increase. Team spirit will increase within a small business if this legislation is enacted and goes through. And people will feel better about being honest with their employers. So we do wholeheartedly support the act. I don't want my daughter or my son to have to take time off from work and lose hours and pay because they're caring for me or my wife. I think that's something we can avoid. I think we can all be better than that. I really do. The act is not just good for families. It makes economic sense. Keeping workers in their jobs will help the financial stability of families, communities, and businesses. And I ask for you to pass this act. There's so many, since I've got this gray hair over the past 35 years and reached this state, there are so many things that happen to us health-wise as we age that when we're younger we never think about. And all of us, there's not a one of us at some time in our lives is not going to need somebody to take special time out to care for us. We ought to have a system in place in the employment community throughout Georgia that says, yes, we can do this, and we will thereby have a better result for the family and for the companies that are involved. I thank you very much for your time and your attention.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Reed? Okay, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Rebecca, I can't read the last name. Brandstetter, okay.
I tried to get my husband to change his name to Adams when we got married. He claimed seniority. My name is Rebecca Brandstetter, and I represent the 12th District of Georgia PTA. That's the 21 counties in northeastern Georgia, and that includes Jackson County and Walton County and Gwinnett County and Clark and Habersham counties. And I know that some of those fine places in Georgia are right up there on that dais with you. On behalf of the nearly 300,000 members of Georgia PTA, I'd like to urge you to vote yes for HB 290, the Family Care Act. This is one of those rare bills that truly encompasses the founding purposes of PTA, which were adopted a century ago but still hold true for us in the 21st century. To promote the welfare of children and youth in home, school, community, and place of worship, to raise the standards of home life, to secure adequate laws for the care and protection of children and youth, to bring into closer relation the home and the school, that parents and teachers may cooperate intelligently in the education of children and youth, and to develop between educators and the general public such united efforts as will secure for all children and youth the highest advantages in physical, mental, social, and spiritual education. HB 290 promotes the welfare of children at home, at school, and in the community by allowing parents to take care of their children. We don't need expensive studies to prove that sick children can't learn. Think back to when you were learning long division. Remember Carry the 7? Or the U.S. capitals like Cheyenne, Springfield, and Jefferson City. Then imagine trying to take all that in with a low-grade fever or strep throat or the flu. How many times have you gotten sick recently because somebody contagious wouldn't stay home and keep their illness to themselves? And what did that do to your job production, your job performance? Well, you multiply that by 20, and you get a feeling for the impact that that would have on a classroom. The Family Care Act raises the standards of home life by enabling more parents to stay home with sick children or to take sick children to the doctor without the added burden of wondering whether they will have their job the next day. Right now, for some families, when the job that puts food on the table is on the line, an older sibling has to stay home from middle school or high school to look after a younger brother or sister. And I know a lot of you are closely associated with public schools, and I'm sure that's happened in the school that you're close to. How will students be able to master this new math curriculum if they have to miss class to be caregivers? The very text of HB 290 embodies care and protection of children and youth. When you're sick, you want your mama, whether you're 7 or you're 47, because nobody gives you better care and protection. Families and schools can cooperate more closely in the best interest of the school and all its students under the Family Care Act. Teaching and learning is more effective when teachers don't have to interrupt the lesson to deal with sick children in the classroom. School nurses can use their scarce resources more efficiently when they don't have to look after and isolate children who were too sick to come to school in the first place. Children get well faster and miss fewer days when their illnesses are addressed early. Finally, this bill provides a cost-effective, productivity-enhancing way for businesses large and small to unite their efforts with families and schools to secure for all of Georgia's children and youth the highest advantages in physical, mental, social, and spiritual education. It helps employers retain workers, and it cuts hiring and training costs without any practical change to their sick leave policy. It helps reduce job absenteeism when employees don't have to miss work because their children were infected by a sick classmate. Everybody wins. Jobs in Georgia continue to be scarce.
I'm going to need to call time on you there if you could wrap up.
And unemployment is high for the lower skilled workers who are going to be most affected by this. The Family Care Act lets families take care of business so they can get back into the game faster, stronger, and better able to meet the challenges that they face. Thank you.
Anyone have a question for Ms. Brandstetter? Thank you, ma'am. Charmaine Davis.
Good afternoon. My name is Charmaine Davis. I'm the State Director for 9 to 5 Working Women here in the state of Georgia, and I'm also the co-chair of the Georgia Job Family Collaborative. The Georgia Job Family Collaborative is a statewide coalition made up of faith-based organizations, advocacy and community organizations that are dedicated to expanding access to family leave. But I want to begin by sharing my own personal story about how I benefited from having access to family sick days. On a Saturday afternoon, in April of 2011, I received a phone call from my cousin who lives in Ohio with my mother. And she told me that my mother was in the hospital because they thought that she had congestive heart failure. Now, my mother had not called me before this because she didn't want me to panic and she didn't want me to get worried about her. And the truth is, when my cousin told me this, I did become very concerned because I had just lost my father a year and a half ago, and I wanted to be there for my mother. And so immediately, a lot of thoughts began to flood my mind. I began to think, how am I going to get from Atlanta to Ohio to be there for my mother? Do I have any pressing engagements in the upcoming week that I can't miss so that I can go to Ohio and be there for her? All these thoughts were running through my mind, but I was really grateful that one thing that I did not have to worry about was being able to use the sick days that I had earned on my job to provide care for my mother. Because my employer, 9 to 5, they do offer me that flexibility with my sick days. And so I know intimately from personal experience the peace of mind that it gives workers and the peace of mind that it gave me when I knew that I could use my sick time to go there and to be there for my mother during that period of time. But beyond my own personal experience, I know that this issue has broad support. Excuse me, my throat is dry. I know that this issue has broad support because the Georgia Job Family Collaborative has organizations from all across the state, organizations like the Federation of Women's Clubs. It's an organization that rarely takes a stance on legislative issues, but it has chosen to endorse the Family Care Act because it realizes how important those protections are. And other organizations that are a part of our coalition share that same understanding, such as Easter Seals, the AARP, Interfaith Children's Movement, the PTA, and many others. I have personally led trainings across the state of Georgia in places like Dalton, Calhoun, Rome, to organizations and individuals and families who want to learn more about the Family Care Act and support the Family Care Act. So I know that it has a lot of support from families and individuals in the state of Georgia. The Family Care Act, it strengthens families strengthen communities, and strong communities is something that we all benefit from. I personally believe that it is my responsibility to be there for my mother and to provide care for her when she needs me. And so the Family Care Act will enable me and other workers and families in Georgia to be able to care for their loved ones when they are sick. And so that's why I personally endorse it and stand behind passing HB 290.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Davis? Thank you, ma'am. Allison Smith.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Allison Smith. I'm with the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We represent those who provide services to victims of domestic violence and their children throughout the state, as well as victims of domestic violence. So you may be thinking, what does the Sick Leave Act have to do with domestic violence? A lot, actually. When victims make the decision to leave an abusive relationship, they pretty much overnight become a single parent. So the responsibility of coming to pick up a sick child from school and taking care of them becomes all theirs. And this sort of led me into thinking about this whole question of, why do people stay in abusive relationships? And time again, our field has seen that it's about economics. And so in this way, financial security really equals safety for a lot of victims. So the more that we can do to help ensure financial stability for victims, I think the more that we're going to be able to lower our homicide rate here in this state. Studies have shown that people who've been thinking about leaving an abusive relationship stay longer. 74% of the time, in one study, they said they stay longer because they were worried that they couldn't keep a job or couldn't have a job. And it's the number one predictor why victims often go back. So by passing out of committee House Bill 290, it's a measure toward ensuring some level of job stability for those who, for whom a job really is a ticket out of a very dangerous situation. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Smith? Thank you. Wendy Clifton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Wendy Clifton, representing Georgia Women for a Change. And I just want to echo what everyone else has said. We appreciate your consideration of this important legislation. And it's not often, I think, in my years of working down here at the legislature that you actually see real family values type legislation come before the General Assembly. I propose to you that's really what this is, and just ask for your support.
Does anyone have any question for Ms. Clifton? Thank you. Pat Willis, excuse me.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me appear to make a couple of comments. I certainly value the remarks that have been made by others, and thank Representative Dempsey for bringing this forward again this year. I am the Executive Director of Voices for Georgia's Children. I am an employer. I am a member of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, and I am on the board of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. And I'm not speaking for them, but as an employer, I think this is important legislation because of all the things that have been said about productivity and support for parents as employees. We certainly don't want people to have to choose to be between being a good employee and a good parent. Just a couple other points extra that I would make. You know, schools and child care centers in particular will not allow sick children to stay at school. They send them home, and they call the parent, and the parent has no choice but to go and to pick that child up. And so if our schools and centers are not allowing sick children to be there, what is the parent to do? We have to give them that option. And secondly, I would say that if Georgia really wants to have the reputation of being a family-friendly work environment, these are the kinds of issues that I think say to employees coming to Georgia that this is a family-friendly work environment that we expect. And so I certainly hope that you will support this bill. Thanks.
Anyone have any questions for Ms. Willis? Okay, Chairman Dempsey, if you'll come back up. I know of at least a couple of questions now,
Okay.
and then we'll let you wrap up. Number 13.
Thank you for bringing this bill. I have a couple of questions that can you first of all sort of compare what this sort of does with the in comparison to the FMLA again?
The FMLA addresses a larger company, 50 or more employees. I believe they have to reside within 75 miles of the company. So it's a completely different population.
Okay. Another question I have is in terms of sick leave. It says it doesn't apply to short-term and long-term disability. Much of what has been presented to the committee is conditions that are acute. You know,
Right.
the child gets a cold, the child has gastritis, whatever the case may be. That may be a self-limiting condition. Is there a way that would you be open to defining sick leave in terms of more of an acute illness than a chronic illness?
Do you have a suggestion for that in the language?
Probably no more than 10 days. That's what I would to define it as acute.
Well, you know what? It's defined by the policy that the company has. So if there was a child or a parent with longer-term illness, that would be a completely different conversation. We are trying to deal just with those acute emergency type situations that can become bigger if not addressed. You know, one of the things that surprised me, Representative Spencer, was that in Georgia, particularly when I think you brought up children, that a child under the age of 12, it's illegal for them to stay home alone. So we are sort of not allowing fathers and mothers to abide within the law at times too, because I'm pretty sure that if you think about it, you probably know a child that has spent a few hours at home because a parent couldn't be there when they were sick, when they were a little sick, not a lot sick perhaps. But, you know, I just think it's another measure to help us do the right thing.
I have one more question. Can you speak to the Chamber's opposition to this bill?
Certainly.
In the past?
I can. The Chamber has a policy that anything that in any way addresses Georgia's right to work status, they as a body will not support it. That doesn't mean that their board has taken a vote on it. It is a policy that's within their chamber. I know there are many members that have let me know that they believe this. You know, that is just a policy. So steadfastly, they will oppose it. They did speak to the bill last time, but as I said, it passed. NFIB, I believe we'd have to go back and look. But I think their statement was basically that this did not affect the majority of their members by the size limitations that are on it. But I don't want you to, I mean, if you need to talk to them, I want you to talk to them. I don't want to speak for them.
Any more? Any other questions? Number 16.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Madam Chairman,
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it would clear it up for me and for Representative Spencer. It says in your bill earned sick leave, so I guess that might help me with that question.
Right. On line 24, it says until that sick leave has been earned. So it's very specific. It's not a right. It is something that you earn and that the business has the policy to address.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Number 12.
Thank you. While I'm certainly very sympathetic, and this sounds like very good policy for a company to have with their employees, I'm just wondering why we feel, or why you might feel, it needs to be a matter of state law and the force of government behind it, as opposed to something that's negotiated between employers and employees of that specific company.
Well, I think it's because we have witnessed a gap there where some employers do not allow it. And so it is addressing a concern that's been brought forward by a population that feels very threatened on the ability to keep their job as well as deal, particularly in emergency situations, for their family.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Number 11.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chairman, I think I kind of come at this from a unique position. I have in the past chaired a joint development authority for 3 counties. Economic development is my passion, and I think that the governor has been extremely committed to doing everything that we possibly can to bring jobs into Georgia. I see this as a tool for that. One of the things that we have found through economic development in looking at that is that companies are looking for a good, safe environment for their employees, to bring their employees in. And I see it as a selling tool for Georgia, and I commend Representative Bruce for the work he's done in the past with this, and for you bringing this bill. And I speak as a small business owner. I just think that it's a good thing, and I want to commend you for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Number 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chairman, in Section D, and this is dealing with just some wording on prohibit taking any adverse action.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize. I should have been more prepared to have some alternative wording that does this, but I think there's a little better way to say it that's been used and be more consistent with some other things, including the wording on FMLA that prevents anything. Would you be receptive to looking at that?
Do you have something?
I don't have it with me today. I should have, like I said, I should have been more prepared, but I'd like to look at modifying this just slightly. It's going to do the same thing. It doesn't change this. It's just changing the way it's stated.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Back?
Certainly.
Okay. Do you have, I mean, not to hold you to specific language, but is there anything sort of just a...
The way this is worded, and with 20 years of HR experience, I can tell you, I can see companies saying that I can't even adjust a shift schedule to accommodate somebody for a couple of days under this wording, where that may be a very reasonable thing to do to allow, especially if it is a 2-parent household, that I may just want to, maybe I can work with them and shuffle my shifts around if it's a multiple shift around the clock operation. Somebody come back and say, well, that's some kind of negative or adverse impact on them by doing that, where it could be beneficial. One, it could keep a lot of positive things going And there's just some minor things, if you look at the FMLA wording on how it's returned and things like that, that might fit this a little better, and it still does, I think, what you're trying to do here. And I'd like to at least opportunity to talk to you about that. And like I said again, I should have been a little more ahead of the game on that.
It's not that I'm opposed to it. I know that we're trying to get this moving with the session at the point in which we are already in. So the language in D is basically about reason to discharge or demote an
Or
employee.
suspend or discipline or otherwise discriminate, and it's, I can see where companies would use that. They'll twist and spin it for their own purpose at any given time.
Do you feel like it needs stronger language?
No, I think there's just some more consistent language where we've used it under FMLA return to leave and no adverse impact and things like that, that there's enough of a history that if we have basically the same mirrored language, everybody would understand that and have a clearer picture of exactly that they have some flexibility to work with the employees and employers together, as opposed to, here they go, if you offer to work with them on a rotating shift or something different, somebody might say, well, you're violating what this was supposed to be about. And we don't want to get in the middle of that employee-employer relationship. We want to make sure they're helping them work together.
Madam Chair, if I could
Sure.
Jump in here just a minute. I was going to ask the will of the committee when he finished his question if this is something that you might entertain with the wording. If the committee so chooses to pass it out, it could be that you could get together with him, and I know we don't normally amend bills and rules committee, but that could be something that could be looked at to amend it in rules. Just, I think that we allow not whole sections to be added, but words to be added. I think that would be what you and Representative Kirby would need to look at if you think that his suggestion would improve your bill and improve the chances of it passing. So
Sure, and we're not trying to be the whole, federal package. This certainly is not dealing with 12 weeks maternity leave or any of
those kind of things. But also, this would also apply to companies that are required to have FMLA, which would be a concurrent leave. And the fact that if you've got 50 employees in that 75-mile radius, then you'd have the FMLA requirement. If they have meet also the hour requirement, then they would be taking sick leave, and they could run it concurrent with their FMLA, and they would have two different sets of criteria dealing with any changes or adverse impact.
I want to apologize. I did not see legislative counsel come in. She's here. We can work this out right now if Representative Kirby can come up with some words.
Right. I know there was an effort to mirror it where appropriate. But I'm certainly open to that if you feel like you'd like to go ahead.
Representative Kirby, do you have some language that you would like to add to this?
I don't have it with me right now. Excuse me. I don't have it right this moment, but I could certainly get it very quickly.
Well, and we could certainly meet with the rules chairman
Yes.
if it passes and do that. I'm certainly open to doing that.
Okay.
Can I say one more thing
Sure.
before you stop? I just want to thank y'all for hearing this. I know it's something you have worked on a very long time, and it is something I think that our state needs to look at and not be one of the states who doesn't embrace and act upon family-friendly measures as well where we can. The bottom line is that I feel that this will promote a balanced and equitable system that is fair to employee and employer, and that it will contribute to making Georgia a better place for families and businesses to both grow and prosper. I thank you for letting us come before you today and share this.
What is the will of the committee? Number 11.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we do pass it on.
We have a motion that we do pass. Do I have a second? Number 2.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do I have any other comments concerning the legislation, number 16?
No, sir. It was to second.
Okay. Any comments before we vote? Okay. All those in favor of the motion of passing House Bill 290, if you would, raise your hand. Did you get 9? Okay. All those opposed, like sign. All those opposed, like sign. Raise your hand. We have 2. The motion is carried. House Bill 290 passes on to the Rules Committee. There be no further discussion. This meeting is adjourned.